You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Well, hello, this is Henry Olonga, and I used to play cricket for Zimbabwe many years ago. Feels like almost a quarter of a century ago. I was a fast bowler and had a career that lasted from 95 through to 2003, and kind of left the game under a bit of a cloud, which we'll probably discuss today on the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is a former Zimbabwean international cricketer. He became the first ever black Zimbabwean to play cricket for Zimbabwe. At age 18, he became the youngest player to play for Zimbabwe. In a test career that spanned from 1995 to 2002, he played 30 test matches and took 68 wickets. In an ODI career that spanned from 1995 to 2003, he played 50 one-day internationals and took 58 wickets. His cricketing career is often forgotten. He is best remembered for his Black Armband Protest during the 2003 Cricket World Cup with fellow teammate Andy Flower to mourn the death of democracy in Zimbabwe. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Henry Olonga. Henry, welcome.
Hey, mate, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Henry. I hope you're doing well as well. And it's a great honor to have you on, Henry, to talk about your story in cricket. And it's been a colorful story with challenges and obstacles that you had to overcome. But it's a story worth telling. And I hope people listening to today's episode with you can gain a lot more from you and learn from your story and learn the lessons that you've learned along the way, dealing with the many challenges and setbacks that you had in your life, not only in your life, but also in cricket as well when you were playing for Zimbabwe. And no doubt we'll discuss that as we progress throughout our chat today. So I'm really looking forward to it. And hopefully everyone watching and listening will do as well. So, Henry, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I'd like to take them back to when they first got into cricket. And it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they started to get into cricket. So, Henry, let's go back to the very beginning growing up. I know that's a long time ago. Time flies. What were your earliest memories of watching, playing, and even going to the cricket? And who were some of your cricketing idols growing up?
Well, Jack, it all began for me at the age of about 8 years old. I think it was 8, it could be 9, but it was roughly 8, 9. I was in Zimbabwe at this stage. I'd emigrated from Zambia first to Kenya, and then in the early 80s, my family and I moved to Zimbabwe, which was a new nation. It used to be Rhodesia, had a war of independence. And so with our moving to Zimbabwe, that coincided with the opening up of schools to indigenous people. Prior to that, a lot of the government schools, and in many cases the private schools, were generally white only. You would have the odd flash in the pan sort of mixed race kid or black kid who went there, but generally they were exclusive. And so I went to a junior school called REPS, which stood for Rhodes Estate Preparatory School. And it was there that I was introduced to the sport by a man called Bob Blair. He was the Matabeleland coach, the state coach for our men's team. And he came out for a season or two to coach in the mid 80s, 84, 85, I think it was, something like that. And he was a former international cricketer himself. He played Test cricket for New Zealand. And I guess part of his role as coach for the state side was to come to schools and spread the game. And my school played cricket. And I was introduced to the sport, I guess, in my first year. But I think it was really my second year or maybe even third that I really took a liking to the game. But it was really due to his visit to the school. And then later on in my schooling, so with that introduction, by the way, I discovered I could bowl fast. I was athletic back in the day. I could run fast, and that really helped with me falling in love with fast bowling. But ultimately, I think the thing that really spurred me on was when I went to watch a couple of international matches in junior school. So the first one was the Young West Indies. They came out maybe feels like something like 86, 87. And they came out to Bulawayo, and my school took us in, for those of us who played cricket, to go and watch players like Brian Lara and Jimmy Adams and Carl Hooper, who was very young at the time. They were just on the cusp of selection. I mean, I didn't know these were going to be future legends of the game, but they came out, and a few years later, maybe perhaps when I was in high school, New Zealand came out and played in some one-day fixtures as well. So, back in the day, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have satellite TV, we didn't have broadcast streams, all of that. So you really had to see it live, or you'd read about it in a magazine, or you saw pictures, or books. But watching those players live, Carl Hooper, like I said, Lara, Jimmy Adams, when the Kiwis came, there was Mark Greatbatch and a guy called Simon Dool, who some people may know from commentary. Chris Harris, I think, may have come out as well. I was just inspired, and that was really the impetus for me to get involved in the sport. It was one of many sports I loved in school. I played rugby, I played soccer, tennis, and athletics was my greatest love, I think, up until the age of 16. But those very brief interactions with the game kind of made me think, well, I might be able to play the sport, because cricket up until that point was mainly a white sport, and it was hard to get into clubs. Therefore, it was hard to progress in the sport. But I happened to be at the front of the wave of people who go to school and then go on to play cricket. And that explains ultimately how I guess I was the first black player, because it took something like, 15 years after independence for me to make my test debut.
Yes, it did. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Henry, in terms of your formative years in the game, how you got into the game, how you fell in love with the game. As we will go on in our chat, a bit of a love-hate relationship at times throughout your international career with the game, but nonetheless, the passion and the fire was there from an early age, and as you said, discovering that you can bowl fast and you can run fast and bowl fast, and terrified batsmen at younger levels, and then go on and do.
I think I terrified them because I was fast, but I was described as a wild bowler who didn't know where the ball was going. So I think they're more terrified that they might get hit by the odd quick ball, and then there'd be a wide, and then suddenly a straight one, and they get a wicket. So I kept them on their toes for sure, mate.
You did. Well, if you don't know where it's going, they don't know where it's going. So
exactly.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But thanks for sharing that with us, Henry, in terms of your start in the game and your journey. And it's always nice.
One more thing I'll add is, of course, the '92 World Cup, and I was 16-ish by this stage. We managed to watch that on TV in Zimbabwe. Somehow, I can't remember how. I don't know if it was live or whether it was recorded, but we watched Wazim and Inzamam Haq with all their heroics and exploits in the World Cup of '92, which was played here in Australia, and then winning that World Cup, and Imran Khan captaining the side. And that, to me, was, I think, one of the aha moments where I went, yeah, I want that. And then just a couple of years later, prior to leaving school, I went on a trip with the Zimbabwe schools team, which I played for in my last year of school. And we went to South Africa, and we spent, crumbs, it feels like a week or two down there. We did we took part in what I think was called Nuffield Week. It was a week in which all the South African schools would get together and play against each other, and they'd presumably choose a South African schools team from there. But in any case, we were invited to go and take part in that competition, and it was hard cricket, man. That was next level, because in Zimbabwe was a really small pool of players. As you can imagine, it was a newish sport to the majority of people. But South Africa had a tradition of cricket that went all the way back to the 50s, the 60s. So, long story short, it was it was quite eye-opening. At these massive stadiums. We went and watched a one-day international. I didn't even know how big grounds were or what kind of atmosphere they had. They were cooking barbecues while the teams were playing cricket. It was amazing, and that was, I guess, the thing that really pushed me over the line into thinking this is something I'd love to do. And within a few months, I made my test debut.
Yes, that's usually the case, isn't it, Henry, in terms of watching World Cups in any sport. Young kids get inspired. And it's no different in cricket, as you mentioned just then. And that fired your passion to pursue cricket. Whereas in those days, cricket wasn't really as professional as it is now in terms of money and all that stuff. And people thought, oh, what's the point? Is it really a career? But certainly a career now. And the players are making loads of money, which is good for the players and good for them compared to your day and different generations from then on in. But once again, thank you, Henry.
No, it's a huge industry now. Yeah, it's a massive industry.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Henry, for sharing your journey into cricket and how you got into it. Very fascinating listening to that. Henry, let's talk about and reflect on your Test career, which was a short career, but it spanned from 95 to 2002, as I mentioned in the intro. Made your Test debut against Pakistan in 95, big occasion at Harare, first black cricketer to play for Zimbabwe, breaking down racial barriers. And we all know those are significant moments in any form. You were only 18, the youngest ever to play cricket for Zimbabwe, which I still think is still the record to this day. I may be mistaken.
I've got a feeling Hamilton Masakadza was younger when he made his debut, and I'm pretty sure it must have been overtaken by now. But I was the youngest at the time, for sure.
Yeah. And then, it was an exciting moment, great occasion. And then obviously it came crashing down in a matter of seconds, Henry, because you got called for throwing on the field, which is every bowler's worst nightmare. It is demoralizing. It's you're branded as a chucker, which is an emotive word and that we use in the game of cricket. And bowlers who have been caught on the field, which have been many over the game's history, never come back. They're outlawed from the game, never come back. But in your case, you did. You came back. You seek the help of the great Dennis Lillee, one of the great fast bowlers that Australia certainly had, and also in world cricket. With the guidance from him and others, you were able to come back and continue your Test career up until your last Test against Pakistan in 2002. Perfect symmetry there, Henry. Maybe you're a fortune teller or something. Got to start my career against Pakistan and end it against Pakistan. But you had a pretty good time against Pakistan anyway. Out of all the other countries you played against in Test cricket, Pakistan was one of the countries that you did well against. Many highlights, Henry. There were a couple of 5-wicket hauls in your career. So, Henry, what are your memories from your Test debut against Pakistan? And when you reflect on your Test career, what are you most proud of when you look back?
Well, obviously, as you mentioned, it was a bittersweet debut because I did get caught for throwing, but it was a successful test for Zimbabwe. Heath Street had success with the ball, so did Andy Flower, Grant Flower, and Guy Whittle with the bat. We scored over 500 runs, closer to 540 or something crazy like that. So it was an incredible performance by the side to win our first Test match in international cricket. But as you mentioned, it was very sad for me. Not only did I get injured, but I also got called for throwing, and then I had to do all this remedial work, which in one sense speaks of the faith that the ICC and Zimbabwe Cricket had in me. And it also speaks to the optics. It wouldn't have been a good look, for the first black player to make his debut and then kind of go into obscurity in disgrace. So I'm really thankful and grateful for the folk that still saw the talent and still believed that I could continue in the sport. And many people gave up their time, and I'm grateful for it. So you mentioned Dennis Lillee, but of course, there was a guy called Shaker at the MRF Pace Foundation in India. There was Joel Garner, who was also there in India, in Madras. now called Chennai, and then I came here in 1996 to Australia. The Adelaide Academy was hosted here in this state, and Rod Marsh was running it. Wayne Phillips was part of that. Richard Doan, who was the biomechanics officer or specialist, he was here as well. Lily came over again. We had some amazing coaches all around, people who talked about our diet, sports psychologists. And then the year after, 97, I spent some time in South Africa at the Black Armband Cricket Academy. And I was there for 6 months, and I worked with Mark O'Donnell, Hilton Ackerman, and Clive Rice. And these were all great people who I'm, extremely grateful that they gave their time to help me kind of resurrect my career and indeed get the remedial action that was needed. And so that got me back in the game. And I then went on to play, crumbs, I think it was 126 internationals in total, 51 days and 30 test matches. I beg your pardon, 126 wickets in total, 80 matches. And my best figures in test cricket, I think, was a 5 against India, I think.
Yes,
like
5 for 70.
5 for 75 or something like that. Yeah. And then in one day it was 6 for 19 against England, which I think are still the best one-day figures by a Zimbabwean. So my best memories, of course, in Test cricket was, I think if I reflect, and you mentioned Pakistan, I think my greatest performance as a Test cricketer wasn't necessarily the 5 wickets I took against India in that Harare Test match, but I think it was when we played Pakistan in 1998. I had just come back into the squad. Remember 95, I made my debut, got called for throwing. 96, I came to Australia. 97, I was in South Africa. And so 98 was my make or break year. And many people will know the man, Andy Pycroft. He's now a match referee who goes around with the ICC officiating matches, along with people like Richie Richardson and many others. And he basically sat me down. He was one of the selectors, or he was the head of selection, the convener of selectors, I think they called. And as convener, he sat me down and said, "Listen, Henry, I don't think we're going to look at you again unless you go out there and take 5 wickets." So that 5-wicket haul against India was under duress and under threat that I would never be picked again. But I did it. I did it, baby. He put a bit of pressure on me, and I did well. And I reflected on my career, and I think, unfortunately, the coaches felt that was the best way to get the best out of me, was to put me under pressure. But I think I performed a little better when I was playing a bit more carefree. But anyway, that's an aside. The point is, I think the best bowling impact I had was taking 4 wickets in the second innings in the first test in Pakistan in 98. Now, I can't remember the ground where it was. You could probably pull that up. But I took maybe a couple of wickets in the first innings. But in the second innings, I got 4 wickets rather quickly. And we ended up bowling Pakistan out for something like 110 runs or something in the second innings, somewhere in that region. And we only needed 150, 160 to win. And I think Murray Goodwin was there at the end to hit the winning runs. And that was, for me, and I hope I've got those figures sort of on the ballpark. I'm not accurate with my stats, but I'm close enough. But for me, that was the best performance I had in my whole career. In fact, it was such a powerful performance that I was awarded Man of the Series, along with Yusuf Yohana, who's now called Muhammad Yusuf, I believe. He changed his name at some point. We were joint sort of Man of the Series because in the end the series was abandoned. The last 2 tests were abandoned because of this pervasive fog that would hang around all day and got the second and third test abandoned. So we won the first test, which therefore meant we won the whole series. We won our first away series based on the performance in the first test, and ultimately I was chosen as having the most impact. And so for me, that was really rewarding because it was the season that I became a competitive player. I was bowling quick. I did well against Pakistan, but I also did well against India in that first test. Then they sent me to Sharjah, And if you look on the YouTubes of the world, you'll find footage of me doing well against Tendulkar, and then Tendulkar doing well against me. That was all in that season. And then the World Cup of '99 came later. And so it was a bit of a purple patch for me, 98, 99. And then, then I had a decent sort of middle of my career. And then I was in and out the side after I moved to Harare. And there's a story behind that. I haven't got time for that. But long story short, I joined a club called Takashinga. And far from helping my career, I think it sort of took things backwards. But anyway, that's, in a sense, a very succinct summary of my career. As far as my one-day international career goes, I made my debut against South Africa in, I think, 95 or 96. I can't remember. It's so long ago.
1995 against South Africa was your first.
Yeah, it was. I think it was when I came back from working with Lily in India, and I was bowling all right. But South Africa were a strong side. I mean, they had, Alan Donald, John T. Rhodes, Hansi Cronje back in the day, Andrew Hudson, Dave Richardson, the keeper who ended up being part of the ICC. I think he was my first one-day international wicket, actually. I got him out caught behind. A pretty decent ball, nipped and caught the shoulder of the bat, and I was on my way. I was then to get another 68 one-day international wickets for the rest of my career. And that includes that 6 for 19. So the thing about one dayers was I had speed, but I was very expensive. So they were never sure whether they could pick me. But they knew that if I was on song on any given day, I was a real threat. So that might explain why I didn't play like 100 one dayers by the time I retired in those 8 seasons I played. But I certainly do remember with fondness that night in Cape Town when I got the 6 for 19 against England. But yeah, that's my career. 126 wickets, as I said. There was no T20 back in the day when I played, and it all ended with a Black Armband Protest.
Yes, which we'll get to in just a moment, Henry. And that's the big talking point in not only in your cricket career, because that ultimately ended your career, but your life. And we'll talk about that later. That requires its own special segment. But just back on your international career, tests and ODIs, as you've mentioned there, many highlights, many ups and downs, and obviously challenges from within. Teammates, relationships were strained, coaches and players fighting with each other in terms of the board and all that stuff, as you mentioned in your book, Blood, Sweat and Treason, which is a good listen that I listened to, the audio version of it. And I highly recommend those who are listening to this episode to listen to or read Henry's book, which is very insightful about his life and journey. So tests and ODI career, probably, I think you would agree, Henry, you would think that I was grateful just to play, let alone one, let alone how many 30 tests and, over 50 ODIs, take wickets and represent your country. If you had the chance again, what will you do differently? If you were to start your career again, what will you do differently? I
think I'd be more brave as a batter. I think there were many times when I went out to bat and we were like, might have been a good day for us if we were like 108 for 9 or something, and I was going out to bat. Okay, jokes aside, I think I could have been a bit more brave as a batter. I think I could also have been a bit more clear in my own mind about what I wanted to achieve as a bowler. And I'm not saying that there was a bit of a lack of clarity. It's just I had so many coaches who gave me differing ideas of my role in the side. Some wanted me to tighten up and be a little more accurate. Others wanted me to bowl flat out and bowl every ball as fast as I could. But the problem with that, of course, is it led to injuries, and it also led to me spraying it a bit. And so when I was bad, I would go. I could go for lots of runs in 3 overs, or I could be devastating and take 3 wickets in 3 overs. So I was a bit of a licorice all sorts player, and I can understand the risk of picking me. But I think I was box office on my day. I think people enjoyed the color I brought to the game. I had weird hair back in the day, long flowing dreadlocks, and I was also a little different as a person. I used to, even back in the day, I was a singer, and I had a little bit of a touch of culture, and I wouldn't change any of that. I just think, maybe with my batting, I would have been a bit more brave, and who knows, I could have had a batting career that was a shade above 5 or 6 or whatever it is, in Test cricket. Um, and I think as far as bowling goes, I just think little things. I could have maybe tried to be more of a swing bowler than an out-and-out shock bowler who just banged it in back of a length, because I was always short anyway. And obviously, with hindsight's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because now we analyze the game from every angle. We've got millions of cameras at the ground. We've got hotspot. We've got ball tracking. We've got statistics on how far a player has run throughout the match. I think if we had access to that sort of thing, it would have given me more insight into what brought me success as a bowler and what I should have done more of. We sort of had to figure it out. We had people who sort of tried to look at statistics and make heads and tails of it, of what it all meant, but it was right on the cusp of it becoming a thing. We now live in a very data-rich world, but that wasn't always the case. And we then started to get computers which would feed all the video in, and we'd look at our actions. So no doubt all of that helps, but I think I would have flourished in the world we have today, where you could literally document the reasons why you were successful, and then you'd know what to repeat and what not to do. Um, and I loved Australia. When I came here in '96, I just loved the professionalism that was at every level of the game. And even now, I'm involved with the South Australian Cricket Association as a casual coach, and I also do some umpiring and obviously do some commentary as well. I do some Sheffield Shield stuff, and it's just the respect for the game and at every level is one of the reasons that Australia is so successful in in all its cricket. I'm talking men's and women's and even younger ages, schoolboy cricket and schoolgirls. The 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 structures are so advanced. You've really got to break the system to make it fail. And we didn't have that in Zimbabwe. I think it would have been good if, it took us a long time, for example, to get a bowling coach. We often had one coach who was the batter. Throughout the first few years of my career, David Houghton was our player coach. Then he became our main coach, and he was a batter. And all he'd say to me is, he didn't know what to tell me to do with my arms or where to look, or he was just like bowl fast. And that's good. It was sound advice. But it was only really when Carl Rackerman came on board, and also I worked with Kevin Curran, who's the father, of course, of Sam and Tom and Ben. They were young boys when I was back in Zimbabwe. They're now they're grown men and doing well around the world. But yeah, I think it was only when they came around and I had a specialist who worked with me one on one that I really started to have more consistent success. But then, as I mentioned, when I moved to Harare from Bulawayo, where I lived, and started playing for a different state, I lost all the network of people I'd grown up with: Heath Street, Guy Whittle. I used to play with Andy Whittle as well, and many of the players from Matabeleland, Wayne James. There was a guy called Ross Craig, and many others that didn't make it to the top, but it was a good network to play with because I played with those guys during school. But for the sake of my career, I was told by David Houghton that I needed to move to Harare, which I did. And I think it was probably not the best move for me, looking back on my career. I think I should have stayed in Bulawayo. I just had good friends there. My dad lived there, I had family. And things just changed in a negative way when I went to Harare because I joined a club called Takashinga, which then I think had a negative impact on my career because it was just a different culture. It was an all black side. I was there to be a mentor and to sort of nurture the young players who, Some of them became household names: Masakadza, Chigumbura, Taibu, Matsikayeri. I played with all those guys, but it was just a different. I don't want to discuss it now, but it was just a different atmosphere, which gave me less enjoyment in the game. And then, and then the Black Armband Protest came along. But ultimately, I look back on my career. I don't have any regrets, but I do think I could have tweaked a few things to look back on my career and go, at least I got a Test 50, or I would have had a one-day international 50. Because I got close on a couple of occasions. We were pretty much down and out, and they were bowling spinners. And I was just throwing the bat,
Your highest score was 31 in ODIs, Henry, average of 7.
Yeah, I know, mate. I'm just saying, in that match, I could have easily got a 50. Like I said, the match was done and dusted. We were done, and I could have been a bit more brave and had a few more swings. And I only needed another 3 sixes, and I was close, But yeah, I think I was always looking to, if you will, protect the other in-batsmen. And I don't know. When you look at some of the tails that have wagged in matches where even number 9 and 10, or 10 and 11, can put on a significant partnership, that never really happened with me, just because I maybe wasn't brave enough. Apart from the one match in India, where Andy Flower and I almost got a 100 partnership in Delhi, and then our captain inexplicably declared. So you'll be pleased to know that Andy Flowers scored probably 94 of the ones that we scored in that 99-run partnership, or whatever it was, and I scored a healthy 4.
Well, at least you gave him plenty of strike, Henry. And
I did.
Andy Flower, one of the best keepers in the world at the time, and his average was like 50-something in Test cricket. That's pretty good.
He's a great. No, Andy Flowers, he's certainly a great with that average. One of my points of umbrage is the fact that as I played for a nation that was a minnow nation, us 4 bowlers only often got to bowl once at the opposition, if you think about it, right? So let's say we batted first, we got stuck in, and we got bowled out for 180, and this happened a number of times. The opposition would score 500, and then they bowled us again. We bowled once. They've got Sangakkara on 200 and Jayawardene on 200, and I'm taking 3 wickets for nothing. For lots of runs rather, and you get one crack at the oppo, which I'm not blaming the batters. I'm just saying, sometimes
it's just how it was. It's just the quality of Zimbabwe cricket at the time compared to the other established nations in Test cricket.
No, that's right. But I'm saying sometimes it doesn't work for you as a bowler.
Yeah.
No, the truth is you should bowl the opposition out if you're any good. But my point being, the batters get 2 cracks at it. And if you're in fine form and you score a century in both innings, like Andy did against South Africa, for example, then you can really bolster your average. But if we only bowl once at the opposition and they get a stupid number of runs, you just look stupid all the time. So that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But anyway, I guess it goes the other way, doesn't it? Like for Australia, they dominated so often that their batters might get 1 crack at it. So, if you didn't score heavily, you missed out. And you might not get a second innings to get that 100. So, I guess swings and roundabouts.
9 innings and dominate Australia back in the day. And that's right. The batters only got one dig, and the bowlers had 2 cracks at it. That's why McGrath and Warne's statistics are superior to others.
And the other thing is, there's all this talk about 2 tiers. If I was playing against, I'm not trying to big myself up here, Jack, but if I was playing against Ireland and Nepal and Afghanistan and Burundi and Rwanda in T20s and one days, I suspect I would have had better figures all around. It's just
that's
really,
that's probably true. Yeah, and that's the case.
But I played in an era where we've got some of the greatest achievers in the game. It's only now someone like Joe Root is threatening the upper echelons of the game. But I played in the era when we had Lara, the highest scorer in first-class cricket and Test matches. Tendulkar, the man with the most number of centuries. McGrath, Muralitharan, Warne. I mean, like all those guys who were at the top of the statistics were in my era. And so I'm not suggesting in any way that my stats would have been 10 times better, but I'm just saying it was a tough time to play cricket back in the day, and the game was so much more traditional. Like you mentioned earlier, if you were called for throwing, you were a chucker. Oh my gosh, he doesn't know how to bowl, you know. And there was that edge. There was that edge to the game that made cricket just a tough sport to play. You didn't have psychologists. Nowadays, people are so understanding of a player who's having a tough time. We don't have any of that. You just had to be tougher, you know. We didn't look at the mental health side of the game. We went out there, got hammered, and you had to deal with it. And so I think you'll find a lot of players from my era have issues after the game, and it's probably worth talking about in a podcast of yours. But it's worth exploring. You know, we've had a lot of players like, and I don't want to sort of dredge up anything that will cause pain for people. But if you think of Hansi Cronje, like there was a money issue for Hansi. We recently lost Graham Thorpe.
Yes.
There have been many players who've been involved in taking drugs. So Brendan Taylor from Zimbabwe, Heath Street prior to his death, he had a bit of an issue as well with bookmakers. So the sport as a whole can leave you with trauma. At least back in the day, I think things are better now. There's stuff in place that'll help someone who gets caught for throwing to sort of pick themselves up. I mean, for me, it was just, hey, we're going to send you to India to work with Lily. Come back sorted. You know, go and fix your problem, old boy. You know, and it was a very masochistic sort of world. I don't know if that's the way to put it, but it was a man's world. You just couldn't show weakness, and if you didn't do well, they would demote you, which is what they did for me when I had a bad season. They dropped my contract from an A grade player to a C grade player. They didn't give me a chance. They didn't talk to me. They didn't say, Henry, we're going to drop you down to B, which means less pay rather, probably less play as well. They just dropped me to C, man. Like I was the first person they ever did that to. It was like a personal vendetta from the people running the sport, and they were starting to get these new faces like Stephen Mangongo, who was the Takashinga man I mentioned. He became one of the selectors, and he didn't like me, didn't like my style, didn't like the fact that I was middle class, that I come from, from really good schooling background. I had culture. I used to sing. I had white friends. It was just like I was not one of them. And I mentioned this towards the end of my book. I don't know which whether you caught on to this, but towards the end of my career, I found myself being fired at from both sides in Zimbabwean culture. So the white folk didn't like me at one point because there were tensions in the side, and then the black folk didn't like me because they thought, that I wasn't one of them. And I'd always had to deal with that as well throughout my life in Zimbabwe because I was Kenyan. I was a Kenyan citizen even when I made my debut. But I naturalized, I became Zimbabwean, but I had a Zimbabwean mother and a Kenyan father, and I was born in Zambia. So I was always treated as an outsider before I even did anything. And so towards the end of my career, I was getting a lot more joy, being on stage and singing and being involved in other things. I was involved in a church, and I got a lot more a sense of purpose from things that brought me joy, like working with charities, and unsurprisingly, I've continued those things after leaving the world of cricket. But it also may explain why I think I'm a little more grounded as well than a lot of other cricketers who may have suffered trauma, in that I had a life outside of cricket, and I had other things that gave me balance and stability and a foundation in my life. So although I played a career and I lost it, I look at it philosophically because it's just a sport at the end of the day. You have your time in the sun, and I had mine. And frankly, at the end of the day, it's just math. It's just numbers, isn't it? It's just, oh, you took so many wickets. You're such an amazing person. Oh, you took less wickets. You're not so amazing. But ultimately, it's just a piece of leather hurled at blocks of wood that have been carved by a carpenter. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But at the end of the day, your career will end, and then you've got real life to confront. And do you want to have kids? Do you want to leave a legacy in the world that goes beyond the sporting field? And on my deathbed, I'll reflect on a lot of the things that I've done in my life, and cricket may feature, but it's not really at the center of who I am as a person.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at that, Henry. In terms of perspective, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Perspective, and it makes you think about a lot of things. And I suppose what you touched on there, the game has changed for the better in this 21st century compared to your time in the last century. And obviously players who suffer from mental health issues, cricket has a long history of players taking their own lives. There have been books written about it from David Frith, the cricket historian who wrote 2 books on the issue. And the numbers are very staggering. Why is that? You lose a sense of purpose because you've played cricket all your life. You've trained up to be an international cricketer. And then once that's gone, people who don't get into the media, often former players like yourself and others, get into commentary, get into other stuff within media and have a purpose there, still connected to the game. Whereas other people just fall off the rails and they don't have that. They lose direction, they lose purpose, and their lives spiral out of control.
And I'll just add something else, because we also lost Peter Roebuck. Remember Peter Roebuck? He
Yes.
Took his own life as well a few years ago. But ultimately, with other sports, mate, at least because the sports bodies were actually very healthy when it came to coffers, and they shared the love a little bit. You could get someone like Michael Jordan retiring as a multi-millionaire or possibly a billionaire. So if you gave your life to the sport for 20 years, you came out of it with a very healthy nest egg and a nice retirement fund. And so if you were depressed, at least you could enjoy life a little bit more than the average person because you had a little bit of money to spend, right? But back in my day, we weren't paid very well. And look, I don't want to be unkind to the administrators at the time, but they didn't want to share the love, man. They didn't want to share the pot. And the pot is much bigger now because of the IPL and the franchise cricket around the world that's been proliferating just about everywhere on the planet. But ultimately, as a cricketer, you gave so much to the game. You have messed up fingers. I mean, I don't know if you've seen former cricketers and how messed up their hands are. Cricket ball's hard. We don't catch with a mitt like they do in baseball. So you end up, they often are. Broken fingers and bruised egos and many people also divorce, ironically, after a career. In England, you've got what's called a benefit year. So if you've been playing for a number of years in county cricket, you get a benefit year. Oftentimes, the wife would say, "Oh, you've just got a nice sort of benefit year. You've got $500,000. I think it's time to leave. Take half the guy's money, take half his property, and because cricket seems, for whatever reason, to be a very healthy bed for poor interpersonal relationships. Because you were away for months of the year as well, remember. With the way we traveled, we early on did not take wives and partners with us. So relationships struggled, mental health struggles. Imagine being on a tour in England and you're getting hammered by England, you're away from your family, you're away from your missus or your kids, and overall you're having a tough time and you're just being told to just sort it out and toughen up. And I don't think it was an easy environment back in the day, but thankfully world cricket has wised up to it, and we're much better now in dealing with these issues. So more power to the sport. I think they're getting a lot right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm happy. I'm actually happy for people going into the sport now. I'm happy they're getting paid really well. I'm actually fortunate. I don't need to be wealthy, Jack. So I'm not one of those who regrets that I didn't come in the golden era of cricket, because materialism doesn't drive me. It's not like, oh, I'd like a big house with fast cars. and throw lavish parties. I've never wanted that for myself, so I don't feel I've missed out overall. But I'm actually happy that today's superstars are compensated accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting paid for what they deserve, I suppose. And whereas back in your day, and even when World Series cricket began in the late 70s, Kerry Packer, it changed everything, and for the better.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is now that you still have boards fighting with players, like the West Indies. Look, it's got boards. Stuff that's been happening for 20 years, still going on because of amateur attitudes in some of these cricket administrations. And, well, look, obviously the ones that join with the players and treat it like a partnership are the ones that are doing really well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we need to keep talking about these topics and issues and keep raising them. And hopefully many players don't go unnoticed, I suppose, and require help and assistance from all cricket boards and countries around the world, which we're starting to see more and more of. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So Henry, before we move on from your Test and ODI career, some quick fire questions about some things in your Test and ODI career, just before we move on. So let's start with the quick fire questions. Favorite batter to bowl to? Who was your favorite to bowl to?
Oh, wow. Favorite to bowl to? Look, I don't know.
There were so many. It's hard to choose.
No. I didn't have a bunny. I didn't have any bunnies. I didn't have anyone that I like knocked over all the time. I think the closest would probably be Sanath Jayasuriya. I think I got him out more times than anyone else. I could be mistaken, but I think so. But it wasn't easy to bowl to him. For those of you who watched video of the guy, he was devastating. He was doing baseball before baseball was a thing. So it really is. In fact, I think it was him and Kalawitharana who really lit up the World Cup of '96. And they came. There was a guy called Dav Watmore, who's an Aussie, who went and coached them, and he just brought this firebrand approach to batting in the first 15 overs. Just like, throw the bat, man. And they did. And so he would do that to me, but I had a little bit of pace, so he'd smash me for sixes and smash me for fours, and then I'd get him to nick off. And so I don't know how many times I got him out, but I think I enjoyed the challenge of bowling to someone who was so unpredictable, because it wasn't about bowling a line and length. It was like, hey, if I don't get this guy out, he's going to make me look stupid.
I think that's a good choice, Henry. As I said, in the time you played, you had so many like Jayasuriya, as you mentioned, Lara, Tendulkar. It's just so hard to choose, really, because they're all great players. So thanks for that, Henry. Favorite teammate? Who was your favorite teammate in the Zimbabwean team?
Oh, I think Douglas Hondo. And Douglas Hondo was just a simple guy. And I don't mean intellectually. Sorry, Doug. I mean, he was a simple guy to get along with. He wasn't complicated. He didn't have an ego. He was a nice guy. I used to train with him. We used to do gym together. And but that was in the latter part of my career. In the earlier part of my career, it was Pommy Mbangwa down in Matabeleland. We played together for Matabeleland and played for the national side as well. And same with him. I did gym with him. So those were my brothers. They've both gone on to do well. Pommy Mbangwa, obviously, a revered commentator in South Africa and around the world. And Dougie Hondo, I think he's still coaching in Zimbabwe and around the place. But those were guys who just naturally got along with. Some of the other guys were a bit younger, whereas those guys were my sort of age range. So I got along with them. And, obviously got on well with any of the players I played with from Matabeleland, because I played the majority of my career in Matabeleland. So Heath Streak and Guy Whittle, Ross Craig, all of those guys I got on well with. But I think Pommy Mbangwa I went to school with in primary school, and we were rivals in high school as well. And Dougie Hondo, like I said, we trained together in Harare when I moved there. So those would be the two I would choose.
Yep. Favorite cricket venue to play at? Home and away. So if you had to choose one
for
home
would be Harare. Home would be Harare Sports Club. I think Queen's Ground was just a road. I mean, it still is. That's the ground where this South African fella, the all-rounder Mulder, scored
Yes.
360 or whatever it was and decided to declare. He could have scored, I'm telling you now, I'm not kidding, he could have scored 1,000 runs if he wanted, because Queen's Ground has always been the flattest wicket in Zimbabwe. I think it's a travesty to play any cricket there, because Zimbabwe never does well there in test matches. They should just ban it as a venue. Or they should put a bit of grass in it or something, just make it a little bit more interesting.
Hmm.
But I loved playing at Harare Sports Club because I had much success there. And overseas, I think, I don't even know if they still play there, but I played at Worcestershire. Um, is it Grace Road? Well,
Yeah.
I think it's called Grace Road. And just only because it's such a beautiful, beautiful ground. It had the cathedral in the background. But over the last couple of decades, they've had problems with flooding. Because there's a river that runs not too far from the boundary and it keeps flooding it. So I don't even know if they still play cricket there. They'd have to have erected some kind of what do you call it? Not a dam wall, but some kind of
A
levee
levy sort of
to
thing.
to prevent water spilling over. So I don't even know if they still play there. But yeah, I loved it because it was very picturesque. But of course, Lords, the home of cricket, the tradition, the culture, a beautiful place, unless you're Alex Carey and the Australian side, and you legitimately get Johnny Bairstow out in a way that the Lord's crowd and faithful don't like. So,
Yeah.
but I love playing it, and of course the MCC made me a lifetime member.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. That
2003.
helps. That
Yeah.
helps.
Well, I've got my tie somewhere here, and I was very sad to hear that John Fingleton, who was a great friend of mine through the Lashes World 11 and through the MCC, passed away recently. But he didn't just have the tie, mate. He had the hat, the jacket, the underpants, the socks. He had everything. I wasn't as diehard a faithful MCC member as he has been. In fact, I've hardly ever used my MCC membership. But yeah, it's an iconic place, isn't it? The Lord's Oval and walking through the pavilion. I only happened to do that once in a one-day international match against Australia in the World Cup of '99. I went there on a tour a few years later, but didn't play because I had an injury. But yeah, it's an iconic place.
Yeah, definitely. The last one before we move on. What's the one cricket opponent that you came up against and you just admired how they went about their cricket? Someone that you saw in your playing days and you said, geez, that's a good player right there. I really like how he's...
I think easily, beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I'm not talking about success in the field or with the bat. I'm talking ease on the eye, and that is Mark Waugh, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think I ever got close to getting him out, apart from getting him to edge a ball at Lords in that World Cup match in '99. I think Andy Flower got a little bit of the webbing on his glove to it, and if he caught that, I would have been a legend in my own eyes, because I would have got out the great Mark Waugh. But Mark Waugh, to me, just made cricket look easy. I know it was hard, and he played for the Lashes World 11 like I did many years ago, and I had chats with him, and a lot of people accused him of giving it away. You get to 100, and then he wouldn't press on and make a big 100 or a double. And I think that's unfair. But anyway, irrespective of what people think about his potential to have been a greater cricketer, I just love watching him. And even when I bowled to him in Harare in the one-off test match in '99, I think it was, I would I would bowl a ball and just stand in admiration of how beautiful the shot was that sent the ball rocketing to the boundary. He was all class, in my opinion, Mark Waugh. I could watch him all day.
And a good fielder.
I'm not saying
he was a wonderful fielder.
Oh yeah, a good set of hands in slips and amazing thrower and fielder. But I'm not saying any of the other cricketers don't have my admiration. There are many. There's so many. Tendulkar, Vara at the top of the game. Even players like Chris Cairns, the great all-rounder from New Zealand. Nathan Astor, I belted him as well. He was a dasher. There's just so many. Stephen Fleming, the Kiwi captain, he often, there at the top of the order and beautiful outside the off stump. Anything wide, he punished. A beautiful cover drive. There's so many that had their thing, and of course, and another one. I'll throw one more in there, and it's a guy called Bota Dippenaar. Dippenaar was a fantastic looking player back in my day. He never quite reached the heights of the game, but I loved watching him. I loved bowling to Yusuf Johanna as well. Lovely challenge to bowl to him, and of course, Jayawardena from Sri Lanka. Just again made it look easy. So it's always hard to answer questions like this because as you're talking, another player pops into your head, Sangakkara, and you almost don't stop. But ultimately, I think top of the pile for me was Mark Ward, just a beautiful player.
Definitely, absolutely. I think many people would agree with that. Henry just made it look so easy. It's not, but he made it look so easy. Batting and then bowling. Also bowling as well. Forgot he's bowling. He could bowl some.
Yeah, wasn't he? Yeah.
And, his brother Steve was not a bad player as well.
That's right. Yeah.
That's another name. There's so many.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
It's like
Pardon me?
It's like picking your favorite child, Henry. You can't make up your mind.
Oh, of course. My favorite child is both of them.
Of course. There's no favorite in the Olonga household.
Yes. And you'll be pleased to know that I can't say that I know of. I've only got 2 kids.
You only have 2? Because I know you...
Only 2, mate.
Obviously...
My father has a few more than me.
Obviously,
my father's got a bit of a story to tell.
Your parents and your father having different kids with different mistresses and all that stuff. And
well, I didn't say mistresses. Anyway, move on.
Anyway, thanks, Henry, for doing that, reflecting on your test and ODI career and recounting some of the great memories that you had in your career. Which is
no worries, mate.
What you do, I suppose, with podcasts and interviews. You reminisce about the past and good times. Henry?
Yeah. Well, hopefully I'm jogging some people's memories about that era. Yep.
Yeah, not so a good time. We now come to the Black Armband Protests in 2003, which I mentioned in the introduction to this interview was obviously you and Andy Flower making a stand and a protest wearing black armbands in the 2003 Cricket World Cup in that game against Namibia, which was the first game of the tournament for Zimbabwe, to mark the death of democracy in Zimbabwe at the hands of the brutal regime of Robert Mugabe, who's no longer with us. He passed away in 2019. And you and Andy weren't really close as teammates, but you bonded together over this one thing, and you've become very good friends since. Both of you felt very passionate about and strongly about what was happening in the country. And you wanted to take that stand and make that protest, which you did. And I think a couple of years before that, Henry, you wrote a song called Our Zimbabwe, which was to unite the country. And I listened to the song myself. It's quite inspiring. The lyrics and the way it's sung, it makes you feel patriotic, even though I'm not from Zimbabwe, but it's got that feel about it. And I hope that was what you wanted to do in the song and resonate with fellow Zimbabweans as well. I would suggest everyone take a listen to that. Henry has an amazing singing voice, as we know. Obviously, many people weren't happy about the protests. You had some threats about your life in that 2003 World Cup, Zimbabwe secret police. You're hearing someone in the government telling someone that Henry Olonga chap's got something coming towards him or something like that. And that pretty much ended your career. And obviously Zimbabwe qualified for the next stage of that World Cup, which was in South Africa. And that was your ticket out of Zimbabwe. You couldn't go back after what you did. Announced your retirement from one-day cricket as well. There was some problems. Australia didn't want to play in Zimbabwe, but they did in the end. But England didn't with Nasser Hussain, and that ended a bit ugly. And obviously you caught up with Nasser was saying earlier this year when you were there at the
That's
test match at Trent Bridge talking about this. And that was the first time you met Nasser since that day, which was 22 years on. So, Henry, could you walk us through that process and the motivations behind the Black Armband Protest? And now, 22 years on, do you feel the protest achieved the impact or change you would have hoped for at the time? So your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I think I would say, and I'm not being one of those people, but I really think that I need to say I cannot do justice to this in a few minutes. And I really highly recommend people do their own research. And if they can, if there's subscribers on Spotify, they can even have a listen to my audiobook, which will probably get me the grand total of about 2 cents for their stream anyway. It's not a lot of money that I'll get. So I'm not trying to, strong arm people into doing it. But, we put a lot of thought into the audiobook, and I detail with exacting accuracy, blow by blow, how it all unfolded. But I'll try and be brief. So, round about the late 90s, Zimbabwe had political upheaval because the nation as a whole was starting to get a little weary of Robert Mugabe's rule. And there was a new political party that came to the fore called the Movement for Democratic Change. It was run by a man called Morgan Tsvangirai. And he would become an opponent of Mugabe's for the next maybe decade and a bit. But during that time, one of the things he did was he galvanized the people of Zimbabwe to effectively oppose a referendum in which Robert Mugabe would be allowed to change the constitution in the country. And so a lot of urbanites decided to side with the MDC, and the vote was overthrown. And Robert Mugabe was maybe perhaps somewhat humiliated, I don't know. But for the first time, he didn't get his way. And, he was a dictator. So he was in power for 37 years. And that was the first time he wanted something and he couldn't get it. Well, this resulted in a backlash to not only the MDC, but also to people whom the government perceived were supporting the movement for democratic change, which were mainly white farmers. Now, there's some historical context to all of this. There's the fact that Zimbabwe used to be Rhodesia, it used to be a British colony. There was a war which lasted for a number of years in the 70s, which enabled Zimbabwe to become a thing. Prior to that, it was Rhodesia. In the mid-50s, I think, or 60s, a man called Ian Smith declared unilateral declaration from independence from Britain. And gosh, if I'm right, I think it feels to me like it was the 60s, so like mid-60s. Anyway, and that really was one of the catalysts for the Civil War, which happened in the 60s and 70s and lasted a decade or so. And Mugabe and many of his supporters were thrown in prison, incarcerated for much of that war. Anyway, he comes out and he's the first leader Zimbabwe's given. He was voted in by a landslide, and unfortunately there were stories of voter intimidation and violence even in the first election. But anyway, he became the father of the nation, if you will, and many were surprised that he beat a man called Joshua Nkomo, who others labeled as the father of the nation. But Mugabe became the leader, and over those years, so say for the first decade and a bit, the country just continued to function. People didn't ruffle feathers. There was a dissident problem in the early 80s, and Mugabe sent his army to go and find the dissidents. But unfortunately, the army committed atrocities and murdered almost 30,000 people at least, and up to maybe 100,000 people. And so there were red flags along the way that Mugabe was a ruthless leader who would use violence to get his way. So anyway, cutting a long story short, fast forward back to 98, 99, 2000, Mugabe allowed so-called war veterans to go and invade the land that they argued had been stolen from them, and they wanted to take it back. I guess that could be the kind of argument that Australians might understand. Like if the indigenous people of Australia decided that they wanted to rise up and confiscate land from, white settlers because that land was stolen from them thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, whatever the case may be. That kind of gives you an analogy of what the sentiment was at the time. So Andy Flower had a friend called Nigel Huff, whose farm got taken over. And let me just say, it was a very tumultuous time. Lots of people died. I'm talking about that period of time with the land invasions, as they were called, the farm invasion. Many people lost their jobs. A lot of black farmers were displaced. But anyway, cutting a long story short, Andy came to me one day saying that he felt what was going on needed to be challenged, and a friend of his lost his farm, a man called Nigel Huff, and he backed some kind of protest at the World Cup of 2003. And he felt that a boycott, a total boycott, was the way to go. Now, Andy spoke to me, and I'd already come to the same place myself because I was tired of the corruption. I'd written that song. I was in Zimbabwe. I was working with a charity for orphans. And so I was just starting to get mad at the corruption and the mismanagement of the country and the high taxes I was paying and seeing very little for it. And so I was ripe and ready to do something. And cutting a long story short, in the end, Andy Flower and I decided we would just limit the protest to the two of us. We ended up deciding it was going to be a Black Armband Protest and also writing a statement. Now, there are other players involved in the protest, people who helped us write the statement, people who we consulted with about security. We picked many brains before we did it. A journalist that helped us getting the statements out, Jeffrey Dean, for example. So there was a lot of stuff that happened in the background that I just don't have time to talk about now. But ultimately, as you mentioned, it was the first match Zimbabwe played in the World Cup 2003. We played it in Harare at the sports club, and it changed my life. Long story short, it wasn't long before I was dropped from the side. Then I got death threats, and then I had to flee the country and ended up in exile in England, where I started a new life. And I'm now in Australia, of course, but I lived for 12 years in England. I fled there. I was shown kindness by so many people who helped me escape. Remember that trip I made in '96 to work with Dennis Lilly here in Adelaide? Well, it so happens that I met my wife on that trip. We stayed friends for many years, just long distance sort of pen pal type friends. And then, well, in 2004, we got married. And then we started a family in 2010. And 5 years later, she wanted to come home, and so we came. And so we've been here for a number of years now. It's 10 years now since we settled in Oz. We live in Adelaide. It's a lovely place. It's not complicated. Life is very simple here in a good way. Kids are settled in school, and we just get on with it. Of course, I've got half an eye on what's happening in Zimbabwe and in the world of cricket over there. They've had a tough old time in the last few months. They're playing a lot of cricket this year. I think they're playing 11 tests or 12 tests in the year, something like a calendar year. It's going to be a very tough time for them, especially if they're playing top flight opposition. And so, if I'm not mistaken, they played against England, got beaten in that one-off test, and they played against South Africa, then they played against New Zealand, and did they just play Sri Lanka in a test match as well, test series as well? They certainly played them in one day. But anyway, listen, this train is going to roll on, and they got more cricket to come, and I think that's a good thing. But I think at some point they've obviously got to start succeeding against good opposition. Otherwise, the calls for a two-tier system will grow ever louder. And if another Mulder comes along and takes Lara's record, obviously there'll be serious questions asked about the quality of the team. Should they be playing against the top flight in cricket? And I think it would be a shame if they don't play against the good sides. But they'll need to start putting the numbers on the board now. They'll need to start scoring good runs and bowling sides out, and then becoming competitive.
Yeah, definitely. Just one more question before we move on, Henry. Politics and sport. People say they shouldn't mix, but on the odd occasion they do. And we've seen many players, obviously like yourself and Andy, as we've talked about, 2003 Black Armband Protest. We've seen quite a few more players make protests or release statements about things that concern them in terms of their own beliefs and what they think is right. Do you think that players should have that right to express what they express about things in the world? Or do you think this is from an athlete or a cricketer or a sporting person? Or do you think should focus on the sporting side of things because many people don't care about politics or other stuff? They just want you to go out there and do your thing. They don't really care about what you're championing or what you believe strongly in. But I suppose people will relate to that from their sporting heroes and make them think about these things. And I'm sure that's what you did with Andy at the time when you did the protest, to make people think about these things a bit better. So your thoughts on that, Henry?
Okay, well, I'll try and be brief, but first thing I'll say is, as a sportsman or a sportswoman, you obviously have personal feelings about things. And I think if we live in a world where you're free to express personal opinions, then you should be able to do that in your personal capacity. The complication is you are an ambassador of your country, and you represent, I guess, the highest ideals of your country. As a sports person, you shouldn't really be getting involved in frivolous things. I mean, if you literally have a high commissioner in another country, doing things that are unbecoming of a high commissioner, you'd probably call him back, wouldn't you? Or her back. Could be a woman, couldn't it? But, if you've got a high commissioner, say, representing Australia in a country like Ibiza, not that you'd be in Ibiza, but every week they're partying and saying inappropriate things on social media and, swearing in front of the cameras, you'd probably say, I don't think you're cut for this, buddy or lady, because there's an expected level of decorum that's expected from someone in that position. So now we've got to mix these two worlds. Back in my day, we did not have social media, so we did not have a social media code of conduct. We did not have anything to say, you can't talk about this issue or that issue. But we also didn't have a playbook on what you do when your country's run by a dictator who's a murderer and has murdered 30,000 plus people. And then what do you do in a country like that? Do you stay silent? Do you speak out? Do you just play the sport and mind your own business? And I don't know. It's a dilemma, isn't it? Like let's think back to maybe 80 odd years ago when a man called Adolf Hitler was doing his thing around the world and people were just following orders, right? Most of us look back and think, how dare people just go along with it just because it wasn't the right thing to do to stand up to authority, right? Most people will think, in an abnormal society like Zimbabwe was at the time, it's okay, justifiable, in my humble opinion, to do abnormal things, to have attention brought to a situation. And it's quite sad that it was kind of left to sports people and journalists and lawyers, and the rest of the world, the real politicians in the world, just kept quiet. They didn't want to rock the boat. And Robert Mugabe was a firebrand. He would call the West out on its hypocrisy. And so the minute they tried to tell him to get his house in order, he would say, oh, but you guys invaded Iraq illegally, and they'd shut up. So it was kind of almost left to people who didn't have mud or dirt or blood on their hands to speak out against big power. And you need to speak out against big power. We need people like that in this world. Otherwise, big power abuses its power. It just does. I wasn't looking for the fight. I just wanted to play cricket. I just wanted to bowl and do well for my country. But, my poor fellow countrymen being smashed up by the police or the army and losing their homes, and corruption is stealing their salaries, and it was just a very, very bizarre time, if I'm honest. And it's not something I'd ever do again because I don't think I'll ever come across those conditions in my life. But you know what I've got, Jack? I've got, I guess, the satisfaction of knowing that in a time of great distress in Zimbabwe, I stood up and did something. I don't care whether politics and sports should mix or shouldn't. I really don't. I know that real people lost their lives because a leader who had a big ego could just snap his fingers and they were gone. And I'm glad I spoke up. I'm glad I said something. It's not a life calling for me to just constantly harass politicians. But, that's why we have a free press in the world. It's to hold big power to account, isn't it? That's what voices, even if they're lone voices in the world of sport, are there for. Now, in recent times, we've had some people attempt to do protests. We've had Usman Khawaja, speaking out and trying to do symbolic protests, and the ICC have clamped down on it. So I think they've learned their lesson. They won't allow it now. But back then, it was a different time. Back then, we hardly had a free press. There was one newspaper in the country in Zimbabwe. There wasn't much in the way of a way to express yourself on a large scale. And so Andy Plow and I did that. And, other sportsmen have expressed their political opinions, on the sporting field. But, it's hardly the biggest scandal in cricket. We've had match fixing, we've had spot fixing happen. There have been scandals revolving around financial impropriety at the highest levels in some boards. We've had some serious scandals, and a couple of players wearing a black armband and saying a few words that might hurt a few people, asking the powers that be in their countries to try and be nicer, I think is hardly the worst thing in the world that you can do. But according to some people in Zimbabwe, I was a traitor. I dishonored my country and I deserve to die. Now, we're doing this podcast just a day or so after a man was assassinated in America for speaking his mind. I don't want to speak into that. I'm just saying, isn't it a crazy world if people threaten to kill you just because you open your mouth? For words. Jack, for words. For writing nice, encouraging words to implore someone who's powerful to do a little better. That can get you killed. To me, that's insane.
Yes, that's very true, Henry, and it does make you think, ponder about these things, things that do affect us on a day-to-day basis in our lives, and it's.
And of course, one more thing, if I may add, Robert Mugabe was the patron of Zimbabwe cricket for all the years that I was there for. Like, who brought politics into sport then? Like, he literally would come down to the matches and shake hands with players from other countries. Doesn't happen in every country, but it happened in Zimbabwe. Yeah, and Zimbabwe and the ICC were terrified to say anything. They said, "Oh, we're an apolitical organization. We don't involve politics in sport." But then, there were pictures of Modi and Albanese rocking up to a test match in India, driving around in the open-top car. I mean, like, the pollies are very comfortable around sports people. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's fashionable for them to be seen around sports. And so it's weird to me that people just apply it when they think it should be applied. Sports and politics shouldn't mix. Yeah, but one of the reasons sport does so well in Australia is because the sporting bodies actually put money into it. The sports commissions and the sporting bodies, they invest, they give grants to promising kids, they give scholarships. So sports and politics are intertwined. It just gets ugly when it confronts us in real life. We just don't like it invading our space when it's talking about real issues in life. Because for most people, unfortunately, sport is about entertainment. They just want to leave the game feeling happy that their team won. They don't want to be confronted with the news at the end of the day that talks about the financials, and it talks about war in this region of the world, or drought, or death, or a tornado, or a tsunami. And I totally get it. Sport in many ways is an escape for people. And it's also the bastion of patriotism for others, because we don't fight real wars anymore. You know what I mean? We sort of do, but we don't. Like, we don't go and invade another country to show our dominance over them. So we try and do it on the sports field. And so I understand it's tight. It's sort of interwoven with nationhood and a sense of belonging and who you are. People wear sports teams, they wear the caps, they buy the paraphernalia. And so I get it. I get it. But all I'll say is back in the day, Zimbabwe was a very abnormal place. And for people to have stayed silent would have been inhumane and a travesty. And even today, if there's suffering in the world and someone wants to speak out against it, I won't begrudge that person. Usman Tawadi, whoever. If he loses his career over it, and that's the price he's willing to pay, more power to him. But I personally empathize with anyone who has a platform and wants to use the platform to speak up against big power.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts there, Henry, on that, and taking us back to that day in Harare with you and Andy Flower and doing that Black Armband Protest in 2003.
And if I may add one more thing, it's like most people will rightly question, who the heck are you? And I would say, yes, who the heck am I? I was just a little cricketer. I'll never be celebrated as a great anything. But, most sports people will promote any political or social issues that the cricket board promote or support. So, if for example, the cricket authorities want to get behind Jane McGrath during the Pink Test and the Jane McGrath Foundation or the McGrath Foundation want to raise money, that's absolutely fine. If it was slightly political, people wouldn't be happy. And I don't understand that. I really don't. Like, politics probably affects your life more than the nice feelings you get from, your team winning. And so I do find it just a little weird that people can be so strongly opposed to the idea that in extraordinary circumstances, people are allowed to speak up. Having said that, as a sports lover myself, I don't know that I'd want every match or every sporting event to disintegrate into some kind of statement or some kind of protest either. So I can see both sides, but I'm biased because I'm someone who was an activist at one point in my life, and I'm biased towards that side. But I totally understand the people who turn around and say, you know what, they shouldn't mix. Just go and do your politics there, and we'll do our sport here. Leave us alone.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum that up, Henry. And then thanks again for sharing that with us. Hi everyone. Hope you enjoyed part 1 of our cricket discussion with Henry Olonga. I hope you enjoyed hearing Henry and I discuss Henry's cricketing journey, Henry's Test and ODI career, and the Black Armband Protest. Stay tuned for part 2 of our cricket discussion with Henry Olonga.